For centuries, we thought we understood the ancient world. We thought history was already written. We thought the biggest discoveries had already been made. We thought men were always the hunters. We thought pirates were only violent criminals. We thought robots were a modern invention. We thought the first great cities began in Mesopotamia. And we thought humans were the only creatures smart enough to enter the Stone Age. But then, archaeologists started digging deeper. They found tools where no human should have been. Bones that belonged to a lost human species. Weapons made from metal that fell from the sky. Machines that should not have existed for another 1,000 years. These discoveries did not just add new details to history, they shattered the old story. Because the ancient world was far more advanced, far more complicated, and far more surprising than we were ever taught. For most of history, stone tools were seen as one of the clearest signs of human intelligence. A sharp rock, a hammer stone, a flat surface used like an anvil. To archaeologists, these objects usually meant one thing: humans had been there. But in Brazil, researchers found something that challenged that idea. Buried beneath the ground were ancient stones with clear marks of repeated impact. At first, they looked like tools made by early humans. But there was one problem. They were not made by humans at all. They were made by capuchin monkeys. For thousands of years, these monkeys had been choosing the right stones, carrying them to the same places, and using them to smash open hard nuts. And the most surprising part is this: young monkeys still learn the same behavior today. So the Stone Age was not only a human story. For a long time, the human family tree looked simple. There were modern humans, there were Neanderthals, and that was mostly it. Then scientists found a tiny piece of bone in a Siberian cave. It was not a skull. It was not a full skeleton. It was just a small finger bone. But when researchers analyzed its DNA, they discovered something astonishing. It did not belong to modern humans. It did not belong to Neanderthals. It belonged to a completely different ancient human group, the Denisovans. That one small bone proved that another type of human had once walked the earth. They lived near our ancestors. They mixed with our ancestors, and they left traces of their DNA in some people alive today. A tiny fragment of bone had revealed an entire lost branch of the human story. For decades, one idea dominated prehistoric history. Men hunted and women gathered. It sounded simple. It sounded logical. And for a long time, many people treated it as fact. Then archaeologists found a 9,000-year-old burial high in the Andes. Inside the grave was a person buried with a complete hunting toolkit: stone projectile points, cutting tools, and equipment used to process animal hides. At first, researchers assumed the skeleton belonged to a man, but the evidence said otherwise. The hunter was female. And when scientists looked again at other ancient burials across the Americas, the story became even more complicated. The old idea that big game hunting was only men's work no longer held up. The past was not as simple as we imagined. King Tutankhamun died during the Bronze Age, before iron weapons became common in Egypt. So when archaeologists found an iron dagger buried with him, it was already unusual. But the real surprise came much later. Scientists used non-destructive X-ray analysis to study the blade. The chemical signature showed unusually high amounts of nickel and cobalt. That pattern matched meteoritic iron. In other words, one of the most famous pharaohs in history was buried with a weapon made from metal that had fallen from the sky. Ancient Egyptians had not mined this iron from the earth. They had taken something rare from the heavens and turned it into a royal weapon. Thousands of years before modern science explained meteorites, ancient people were already turning space metal into symbols of power. In 1901, divers found a strange bronze object in a shipwreck near the Greek island of Antikythera. At first it looked like a ruined lump of metal. For years it did not seem like much, but modern scans revealed something incredible inside. Gears, dozens of them. The object became known as the Antikythera mechanism, and it was far more advanced than anyone expected from the ancient world. It could model astronomical cycles, it could help predict eclipses, and it could track movements in the sky using a complex system of interlocking gears. This was not just a strange artifact. It was an ancient machine that worked like an analog computer, and it proved that Greek engineering had reached a level that would not be seen again for more than 1,000 years. When people imagine Roman writing, they often picture giant stone inscriptions, imperial laws, and serious military records. But at Vindolanda, near Hadrian's Wall in Britain, archaeologists found something much more human: thin wooden tablets preserved in wet soil. These tablets contained ordinary messages from everyday Roman life, supply notes, requests, complaints, and even a birthday invitation. Suddenly, ancient Romans did not feel like distant statues. They felt like real people sending messages across time. And then another discovery changed a different famous story. For generations, many history books treated 1492 as the moment Europeans first reached the Americas. But at L'Anse aux Meadows in Newfoundland, archaeologists found Norse-style buildings and evidence of iron working. The Vikings had reached North America roughly 500 years before Columbus. One settlement on a cold coastline rewrote one of the most famous timelines in history. Movies often show gladiators as meat-eating killing machines who lived short, brutal lives, but archaeological evidence tells a different story. At a gladiator cemetery in Ephesus, researchers studied the bones of ancient fighters. They found evidence of a diet heavy in grains and legumes. These fighters were even nicknamed barley eaters. Gladiator life was still violent. The arena was still dangerous, but these men were not treated like disposable movie villains. They were trained, fed, and medically treated like valuable professional athletes. And the pyramids have a similar problem. One of the most famous images in ancient history is thousands of enslaved workers dragging stones under the Egyptian sun. But worker settlements near Giza suggest a more complicated picture. Organized towns, bakeries, burial sites, skilled labor, medical care, and a massive state-supported workforce. The Hollywood version was too simple. The real ancient world was harder, stranger, and more organized than the myth. It is easy to imagine Ice Age humans as purely practical. Every tool had a purpose. Every animal had a job. Every day was about survival. But a 14,000-year-old burial in Germany suggests something more emotional. A young dog was buried with 2 humans. Later analysis suggested the animal had suffered from a serious illness and likely survived only because people cared for it. That means this dog may not have been kept only for hunting or guarding. It may have been loved. Even in a world of cold, hunger, and danger, ancient people made room for care. And then there is Sparta. One of the darkest stories about ancient Sparta says weak babies were thrown into a pit to preserve the strength of the warrior state. It is a shocking image, but archaeology complicates the legend. When researchers studied remains from the area connected to the story, the bones were not newborns. They were mostly adolescents and adults. That does not mean ancient Sparta was gentle. It was a harsh military society. But the famous baby-throwing story may tell us more about later legends than actual evidence. Robots feel modern. Metal arms, programming, machines repeating instructions. But in the year 1206, the engineer Al-Jazari described remarkable mechanical devices: water clocks, automated figures, rotating drums, machines that could perform actions without human hands controlling every movement. These were not robots in the modern electronic sense, but they were automata, mechanical devices designed to imitate life or perform programmed actions centuries before modern robotics. And that is the strange thing about history. It never stays still. Every buried tool, every broken bone, every unread tablet, and every forgotten machine has the power to rewrite what we think we know. A monkey's hammerstone can challenge the meaning of intelligence. A tiny finger bone can reveal a lost human relative. A dagger can connect a pharaoh to outer space. A broken bronze machine can prove ancient engineers were far ahead of their time. And a sick puppy buried with humans can show us that love may be older than civilization itself. So maybe the past was never simple. Maybe the ancient world was not primitive. Maybe it was full of intelligence, emotion, invention, and complexity that we are only beginning to understand. And maybe history was never finished. Maybe we just had not dug deep enough yet. If you enjoy discovering the hidden side of history, subscribe for more stories like this.